Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure for me to have you all as part of this conversation. Thank you, Katya. Thank you, Bhavna, Arthashala, and the team of Take on Art. It is extremely incredible what the symposium has been, talking about, the conversations that we have gathered around, and it is an extreme honor to be in conversation with Santoshji. Santoshji and I met for the first time sometime last year in one of my exhibitions, where we vividly talked about indigenous arts and traditional arts and their power and the act of resistance that follows in today's very world. And I think what really struck me was that one point where, with immense clarity, he spoke to me about how traditions like Mithila hold many worlds within them. They are devotional, yes, as we have known them, but also at the same time political, critical, and hold a language that has a strong tool and pursuit to it. And it's almost serendipitous that today we meet again, and over here we get to talk about those aspects in this very panel. Welcome, Santoshji. It's an extreme honor to be talking to you. Now, as we begin to talk about Mithila, or traditions within indigenous arts, we often come across these labels that sort of has a tendency to subjugate it, the terminologies, the epistemology essentially, which is folk and tribal, right? It is inherently colonial. And it is important that we sort of look into these things, because these very terms ultimately then also end up marginalizing these already marginalized art forms, push them in the periphery, and look into and sort of remove them from the main art discourse. And I feel artists like Santoshji and the many contemporaries alike and the artists sitting with us today have definitely pushed these boundaries in immense ways. And I sit with him. When I sit with him, I think about the fact that through their works, they have mentioned and they tell us that these form of art today, in its contemporarized essence, are not just static traditions. They are, in fact, evolving art forms. They hold a lot of critical power. They hold a contemporary language that means a lot of a sense to what's happening around the world. They are using that as a tool to sort of respond to everything else. Now, as we begin this very conversation, I want all of us to think of this indigenous art category of sort not as a periphery, but very much central to both the political as well as aesthetic landscape. And when I touch upon this subject, I think what really fits beautifully is Santoshji's Gujarat series on the Gujarat riots in 2002, which is where Santoshji has had the chance to use Mithila as a visual idiom to address the tragedies that took place in that time. Now, Santoshji, I would, look into certain questions that have, brimmed my mind, and we have had multiple conversations, of course. And one of the most peculiar things that I found was how you begin this series of 23 artworks that it is, with Hindu gods and mythologies, and not with any subject pertaining to the riot per se, or, even the violence for that matter. And I want to know what compelled you to actually look into this format, and what does that mean?
Okay, let me first thank Bhavna and Katya for organizing this beautiful symposium. Actually, let me tell you everything as I felt in and around the riot. My nephew was reading the newspaper early in the morning, and he just came upon this news like a riot has happened in the Gujarat, where I went to study fine arts for 5 years. And I really liked the place because the kind of freedom I found there, and the kind of camaraderie I saw there, I was part of, and the kind of teachers I met there. So it was really different from what I found, or saw in the village. In the village, everything was limited. Everything was very traditional. And the mindset was very, very petty. And I really hated that. So I always wanted to see something bigger, a bigger world of art and art practices. So when I worked with American professor for 2 years, I used to say, I don't want to stay here. I want to see a bigger world of art practices. So one of her friend was Mary Silanius, who used to teach art history at Denver, Colorado. So I worked for her for one day, and she was really impressed by the way I took her to the village around and talked about art and culture and tradition. So she said she would finance my education in Baroda, and she did everything for me. And I went to Baroda, got enrolled, and the new world began before me. And then when I finished a 5-year course there and returned to my village, I was really I really did not know what to do. Nothing, no idea as such. The only thing because what I did there was very little. I did not, I was not at all prepared to understand modern art, nothing at all. But since I was I got introduced to this traditional art at a very young age and did well for 10 years, I thought I must return to these roots, to this art, because I had also found an inspiration. That is my Guru Ganga Devi, and she was the doyen of this art form. I just call her doyen because other ladies, other women used it just as a, as a tool, as a cultural aesthetics. She treated it, she used it as a language, a full language which had its grammar, elements, characteristics, and the core. And the core always represents simplicity in any art form, be it music, be it writing, be it dance, anything. It is always simple. And to be simple is very difficult, I'm telling you. It's really difficult. That's why I like Buddha, because he is absolutely simple. So that's how I came into this. I mean, after having spent 5 years, I again started, to paint in this style. So my journey as an artist began from 2000 onwards. And then, yes, next question, please.
Yes, I would.
This is how I'm going to answer the question.
Santoshji is lovely a being.
Okay.
And the conversations we've had has been tremendous. But I'd like to again touch upon that very fact of utilizing godlike figures to begin your series in Gujarat's riot. Yes, and it's interesting because I mean one would look at it in a very direct representational light, and I understand that there are representation and mythological representations that go in Mithila as an art form. But interestingly so, why in this case, and why did we begin with those three?
In this case, because there's a general belief, when we start a work or go out on a journey, we pray to God, we vow to God, because we think that our journey should be good and fruitful, everything is hale and hearty. So in the same manner, I looked upon the series like I want to get the blessings from, from gods and goddesses. And then I also turned to mythology to get clues, because in the mythology, when the buffalo demon, the Mahishasur, was very much, aggressive and oppressed the gods and gods. Then they approached Shiva, the Lord Vishnu, one of the famous of the Trinity, for solution, for some, remedy. And then Shiva, invoked the Virgin Goddess Durga and equipped her with all the attributes, and then asked her to, to kill the demon. Similarly, I thought now, in the context of Gujarat city, he was very angry over what happened in Gujarat. So in my way, he just, again invoked the same goddess to punish the perpetrators. That's how the gods played important role in the context of Gujarat series.
I think that's an interesting light. What also seems interesting is how the usage of religious iconography, from what I understand, also then indicates not just something that we understand as sheltering faith or sheltering a certain sense of meaning in tandem to that, but also something that indicates weaponization of a certain thought in many ways, positively so and also negatively, as we are aware of. Interestingly so, I think in these pieces and works, which you'll follow and you'll see eventually, there's also this understanding of violence not in isolation that I notice in these works. It sort of indicates how violence is very much part of our history. It is part of our politics, but also no religion is without politics, right? And I think that becomes a very interesting aspect. Now, following another question that I observed after looking at all your works was how very interestingly you avoid sensationalism. The works are very political. They are brimming with a lot of direct indications. There are paintings that say Modi Hatao, and there are a lot of such literal indications within the series. But to an extent, when you look at all the works, there is a sense of empathy that overpowers this, which is very, very interesting and hard to do so in my understanding. So my question is, and while there's empathy to all the fear that is happening around, to the victims, etc., was this balance that you maintained and this depiction of empathy deliberate? And for you as an artist coming from Mithila, coming from an Adivasi society, is this very factor, like did you get pulled in the terrain to actually question upon the very trauma that the country was looking at and the fragility of the country as such at that point of time?
Look, exactly. I referred to again, to the mythology, like when Ram had to, the fight the Ravana, he worshipped Shiva, and to seek his blessings, to teach him a lesson, and I think the result was very, very good. Everybody knows that. But when Karsevaks went to Ayodhya for a very good reason, why the result was so bad? Why the result was so devastating? So this was a question that I could not understand then. If you do something with a good interest, why the result would be bad? So that led me to think of these two paintings. In one painting, Ram is worshipping Shiva, and in another paintings, I just want to say, Karsevak did the same thing, but the result was very bad. So this is what compelled me to look at it in that way.
Interesting. I think it's what's also important to note is how folk art is assumed to be something within a certain category of decor or a decorative form of art, or something that's only attuned with mythological subjects, right? And what's lovely about this particular series and the work that Santosh is doing is how he goes out of his comfort zone and really reaches out to play a sense of commentary. Now, moving on to another question, I really want to know, how do you feel about the space that we are in, the world that we are living in, which is at a point where we are facing war, we are facing a rising authoritarian politism, we are also looking at climate change and issues like that. How do you see your art as a solidarity with your community and also with the global struggles that we are as such part of?
Actually, we are part of everything which happens in the world. Suppose 9/11 happened in America. It's not that I remain cut off from that. I learned about it, and I felt very sad. In the same way, when Gujarat riots happened in Gujarat, I felt very sad. So we cannot say, even you are an individual practitioner, you don't remain cut off from what is going around, what is happening in your country. So that's how you relate to things. I mean, even just, very literally, but you know what's happening around you, in your country, or even outside your country. That's how I think I felt when I did this series. Exactly that's what I felt.
Do you think that when you look at solidarity and these aspects, do you also feel a sense of connection and a sense of understanding and solidarity in the same term with Indigenous voices globally? You've also had the chance to showcase your work in India, of course, but also in San Francisco, in US, in Australia, and with that, what do you think about the whole reclaiming of this agency, of this very language that you're building? Do you feel a sense of solidarity in that sense globally with other artists too?
Yes, I feel the same with other artists. Like I'm part of the global community. It's not that I paint, individually and separately, and I see world the way, I want to know. It's not like that. I can also be part of everything which happens in India and abroad or outside India. So when you are an individual painter, somehow you get to relate to the things which which disturb people or which happen in your country or outside it. It's like that.
And could you talk about some of the instances that actually influenced your practice? I remember seeing one of your works in Ojas Art, where you had worked with Manjunath Kamatji in collaboration.
Yes,
And can
yes.
you speak about that work and how was that in tandem with all the three artists that came about? I think that's interesting to know, because with contemporization, it cannot happen in isolation. It has to be certain sense of influence. But doing so as someone who has practiced Mithila traditionally for so many years and breaking that mark and breaking that into something so beautiful that which is now turning into a new contemporary language is something worth knowing. So if you can touch some light upon how you went about sort of building this new language of yours, and how has it been to work around in tandem with all these artists?
Yes, first I would like to tell you, I wanted to internalize this tradition, the tradition, its aesthetics, and all its aspects. So for 10 years, I actually taught this tradition to me, everything. And then I got another very important opportunity when I worked with the American, the ethnomusicologist from America. So I got to know my culture very practically, very physically, because if there is a ceremony, if there is a wedding, if there is any activity, we would go there, she would record everything, and she would tell me everything when we returned from there. So that was a real education for me. I got to know my culture very deeply for the first time, and it was a 2-year program. So I think I really learned a lot about my own culture and fell in love with it, and found, there are lots of, lots of, I can say, power, and lots of, I can say, imagination, and lots of things hidden, which we don't know or which we don't practice. So that was a true education for me, working with that ethnomusicologist. And then I thought myself, I have the right kind of, the knowledge of the tradition. Now I must keep, pushing off the boundaries. And once you do that, it means that you want to do something new. And doing something new is a very, very powerful device, a very nice way of looking at things very differently. And that makes you contemporary. And that's how I become a contemporary artist. And that's how I contemporize the language. Technically, it is the same. The grammar is the same. The color scheme is the same. I just look at things very differently. And that makes me think of, different ways, taking liberties, even what happens during a discussion. I incorporate everything into it as my own language. And then it truly becomes contemporary. Even I feel I practice in the same, I'm not exactly like others, but it is the same traditional language. But I never feel, I'm like I'm folk or I'm this. I always feel I'm just like an artist. I'm just an artist, nothing else. You can put it into a category. It's your requirement. You can do so. But I never feel like that, because the spirit of art and the essence of art is the same. Whether you practice a tradition or a modern language, it is the same thing. And I have really internalized that and been able to imbibe lots of things from different channels. Like I watch movies a lot, not nowadays, but I listen to classical music a lot, most of the time, and classical dance form. And it is utterly simple, I'm telling you. To listen to any classical musician, it may sound complex, it may sound difficult, but it is it is essentially very simple. And this is how I try to incorporate into my own language.
And if I may ask, what was that one point that made you think or made you actually turn your language and expand it? If you can touch a light on that, like what was that one point that, if you can remember, that made you think that you would want to experiment with this art form that you've been making for very many years?
I sketch a lot. And during the sketching or sketches, you are open. You are open to everything. And being open teaches you a lot. Like I converse with you openly on any subject, then I'm free. If you talk about a thing within a format, then you, in a way, you confine. You mentally, you are tied down. But when you are totally free, you know the spirit of that thing. You know a lot of things about yourself, about your own language. So that's how I feel I began to, understand this language as a contemporary language. Okay? I think this is how it works.
No, that completely makes sense. I think it's interesting to know where the light really comes towards when that very point of change, that very crossroad at which artists decide to sort of take the format notch up and sort of experiment with it. And to do so rightfully, it's also important that one has been attuned with the practice for many years, has the foundation right. But absolutely an interesting remark. And I think with that note, it also takes a lot of courage to be able to take away and add to and break something that you have known for so many years, the norm that you have been following as form of a traditional format of art, and to create something so lovely that you have done, especially in this case. I would also like to touch upon this fact, which is also a key idea as part of this panel, which is Indigenous cosmopolitanism. And with that, what I want to touch upon is your tradition is largely, as we know, is followed by women. There are many, many women practitioners with only a handful of male practitioners. And with that, you also call yourself a person who is, sort of gathering and safeguarding this very Mithila form of art, studying into it, rendering into it. But you also ended up going ahead studying at Baroda. And there were certain, structures and, studies that were in place. My question is that as a male artist from Mithila, how do you negotiate between the traditional aspects, the many subjects which now you're breaking in different formats, right? Because the traditional subjects in Mithila are largely very ritual-based, very mythological. So how do you negotiate between what existed as a tradition, what has been followed as a tradition, with your personal voice, and also your modernist training at Baroda?
First, I studied the tradition. So the tradition is basically practiced by women, okay? So that was a kind of education for me, because the women do everything on the floors. So I would stand there and watch them do that. And then I noticed a lot of things like rhythm, like a spontaneity, and then there is a feeling of, very intense involvement. But that is just on the floor. As we transferred those things, those images on the paper, everything changed. Because on the floor, you use just fingers. And on the paper, you use a nib pen, so the things change. Here, the whole perspective changes. On the floor is a collective, activity. Not just one woman does. Other women also participate in that. On the paper, it's your individual responsibility. And it also depends upon what kind of imagination you have, the artist has, and what kind of, involvement the artist feel in doing an artwork. So these things I study very carefully, not at just one point of time, for a long, I can say period like 40 years, imagine. Not just 1 year, 40 years. And I felt very closely that I have become a very genuine inheritor. So that is one side. The other side is that when I start pushing off the boundaries, then I am two things. One, I am a creator, and the other, I am a viewer. So when I view my own art, from there, a sense of balance emerges. From there, a sense of personal aesthetics emerges. And for that, I can take, clues or ideas, a lot of influences from different channels and sources, and then I make it my own expression. So these are the two things I have mastered in just 20 years, I guess. So to me, it's a very long association. And I always feel I own it like a way a musician owns a particular gharana. Once you become the master of a gharana, then you can treat it, even you know the Gharana very deeply. You are free to come up with your own kind of, Bandi Sage innovations with other singers across the world. So this is how this art works for me. Exactly like that.
I think that was really insightful and intriguing, and I will just leave with a little brief note. I believe the time is turning up. I think this is essentially where decolonization lies, and it has been really insightful, and thank you so much for all your insights and to having this conversation. But I believe decolonization doesn't really exist as an abstract concept, so to speak, and thanks to artists like Santosh and the contemporaries and all the artists sitting with us today, and the community who are pushing the boundaries and who are pushing the boundaries of this very mainstream idea of what we know indigenous art as. And to do so rightfully, it's not just to understand, realize what these labels that come with and to resist them, but also this alliance, as all the other panelists have mentioned, the very polyphonic alliance of merging of ideas, coming together of people, the support systems, and the response to the global merit. So I would leave with that very note. And one note that I would like to say is that thank you, Santosh, for opening this space, and thank you to all the indigenous artists who have opened this lovely space of indigeneity, but with remarks and narratives that add to the knowledge scope of our art history. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming here.